Welcome students to lesson 23 of the natural hazards topic. In this lesson I'm going to show you the role that human beings and our activities play in causing climate change that is happening today. Please write the date, title and learning objective. Have a pen and paper ready to learn. Time to review prior learning. Write 1 to 18, read the paragraphs and put the words in the gaps. Do it from memory, please. Go for it. 1. Evidence. 2. Ice core samples. 3. 2.7 million years. 4. Fossil records. 5. Animals. 6. The greenhouse effect. 7. Carbon dioxide. 8. Short wavelength light. 9. Infrared. 10. Orbit. 11. 96,000. 12. Elliptical. 13. Warmer. 14. Colder. 15. Axis. 16. Hemisphere. 17. Bigger. And 18. Winter. Give yourselves a mark out of 18. If you got 16 or more, you've really mastered this. Fantastic. Okay, to introduce this lesson, I'm going to show you a picture, and I will explain the story behind it. Just watch. This picture was taken was painted in 1816 in London, and it's a picture of the River Thames. As you can see, people are playing, working, walking, travelling on the River Thames. It's completely frozen over with ice. This year, 1816, was called the Year Without Summer, and it's why London was so cold that year, and it's why the River Thames was able to freeze over. And it's all to do with what happened 1 year before and many thousands of miles away here. This is Mount Tambora, a volcano located in Indonesia. And the year before this painting was completed, Mount Tambora erupted violently, releasing chemicals into the atmosphere that caused this picture to be possible. A volcano caused climate change. It only lasted a few years, but as you will see in this lesson, volcanoes are capable of causing temporary climate cooling. In this lesson, you will learn the answers to two important questions. The first one is, how can volcanic activity cause climate change? And the second one is, how does human activity cause climate change? And you will realize from this lesson that human activity is the most important reason why climate change is occurring today. Let's go. So here's our volcano. This is Mount Krakatoa, also in Indonesia, and you can see it here erupting. A much more minor eruption than it did in 1883, or much more minor than Tambora's eruption in 1815. These volcanoes were able to cause climate change. Let's find out how. Please write the subtitle and underline it with a ruler. So here's a simplified diagram of a volcano like Krakatoa or Tambora erupting. When the volcano erupts, it releases particles into the atmosphere. Two are specifically important here. Ash, which is vaporized lava, super tiny pieces of lava that are light enough to float into the atmosphere, and a gas called sulfur dioxide. These two particles and gas, when they are erupted into the sky, as they were in 1815 and 1883, they reflect sunlight back into the outer space. And because they do so, less sunlight reaches the ground or the sea on Earth, and so less is absorbed by the Earth, and so less infrared is produced. The wind that occurs naturally in the atmosphere spreads the ash and sulfur dioxide around the atmosphere, creating a blanket in the upper atmosphere that reflects sunlight. And consequently, if the volcanic eruption is large enough and there is sufficient sulfur dioxide and ash, the climate around the whole world can cool for a few years. In 1816, the climate was thought to have cooled by 0.8 degrees Celsius, and this lasted for a couple of years. It can cool by up to 2 degrees Celsius with large enough eruptions. But the point is, These cooler climates lead to, for example, a loss of crop yields because crops need warmth to grow, and therefore deaths amongst many people. It also leads to the spread of ice in the Arctic Circle and Antarctica. More ice means more sunlight is reflected because ice, being white in colour, reflects sunlight. And consequently, the world gets cooler still. So volcanoes can cause temporary climate change in the form of global cooling. But volcanoes do not erupt often enough or powerfully enough to be able to explain current climate change, which is in fact a period of global warming. That is explained by human activity. Please write the subtitle and underline it. Recall the greenhouse effect here, which you learned about in the previous lesson. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, such as methane and water vapor, and in particular carbon dioxide, they allow ultraviolet light and short wavelength light from the sun to pass through, but they prevent long wavelength light, like infrared, from leaving the atmosphere, causing the Earth's atmosphere to heat up. Throughout the history of the world, greenhouse gases have been present in the atmosphere, but what's happening today is that human beings are increasing the concentration of greenhouse gases very rapidly, which is leading to a stronger greenhouse effect and global warming. I'm now going to take you through the story of the main human activities that contribute to the stronger greenhouse effect and consequently contribute to climate change. The first is this. This is a material that is used in countries all around the world, but in particular in HICs, high-income countries, and it's cement. Cement is used in our roads and our bridges and our buildings in particular. It is one of the most important materials in the modern world. But manufacturing cement releases carbon dioxide for two important reasons. The first is this. To create cement, you need to burn limestone at a very high temperature, about 1,600 degrees. And that burning process of the limestone releases enormous amounts of carbon dioxide because the limestone undergoes a chemical change, releasing CO2. Not only that, the amount of natural gas, which is mostly methane, that you need to burn to create the heat to cause this chemical reaction also releases an enormous amount of CO2. And as a result, the manufacturing of cement contributes to about 8% of all human greenhouse gas emissions in the form of carbon dioxide. 8%. Which makes cement, if it was a country, the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world. But that's at the bottom of the list. Above cement is transport. Transport in the forms of cars and lorries and ships and aeroplanes, they are a significant contributor of carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, to the atmosphere. Almost all of these vehicles run on fuel, fossil fuels, in the form of oil, which has been processed into different forms. For example, in cars it's petrol or diesel, in aeroplanes it's jet fuel. When these fuels are burned in the engines of cars or aeroplanes or ships, this chemical process releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and consequently transport contributes 15% of all human CO2 emissions, of which about 3.5% are from aeroplanes, and more than 10% are from land transport, lorries, and mostly cars. As the world gets richer, as people in HICs get richer, more cars are bought, and so more CO2 is released into the atmosphere. Consequently, global trade used through ships and aeroplanes also contributes significantly to climate change through transport releasing CO2. But even this isn't the largest contributor of CO2. For that, we have to look at the way that land is used around the world. Three things are happening. The first is, as we have more people in the world, we need more land. Additionally, as we have more people in the world, we need more land for food. And so, deforestation is a significant problem. Trees are carbon sinks, which means they absorb carbon dioxide and they use it for the process of photosynthesis to make their food. The CO2 becomes absorbed and forms part of the structure of trees, their leaves, their bark, their roots, their trunk. And consequently, the more trees there are, the more CO2 is absorbed from the atmosphere. Deforestation leads to a reduced number of trees around the world, and so more CO2 remains in the atmosphere because the carbon sink is smaller. Deforestation, as you've learned in another topic, happens for many reasons. One might be logging, cutting down wood to sell it. But one of the main reasons for deforestation is this: agriculture. Trees are chopped down so that farmers can produce crops and raise cattle, cows. Agriculture not only causes the greenhouse effect to be stronger through deforestation, but also because cows in particular release greenhouse gases themselves. When cows eat grass, they burp out and release methane. Methane is a much stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, which means it absorbs and traps far more infrared. Agriculture and deforestation together contribute almost 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 increase in the atmosphere. So land use change in the form of deforestation and in the form of agriculture are significant contributors to climate change. But even they right now are not the main cause. The most important is this: energy production for electricity and for heating. Power stations, thousands of them around the world, use fossil fuels to create electricity. Here in China, a coal power station burns coal to create electricity. When you burn coal or oil or natural gas, which is methane, you release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This process of energy production for electricity is required by all countries in the world, but mainly for high-income countries and newly emerging economies, NEEs, such as China, India, and Brazil. Recently, countries have been moving to renewable energy such as solar and wind power, which don't use fossil fuels to create electricity. But the vast majority, which means the most of our energy production, comes from the burning of fossil fuels such as this. And consequently, a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions created by humans is from energy production. In total, our annual production of CO2 is 45 billion tons every year, also known as 45 gigatons. This is the main cause of climate change today, because these processes together create a stronger greenhouse effect, leading to more warming of the atmosphere. And this is how we can show this. Subtitle, underline it please. The red fluctuating line shows global temperatures over the last 140 years. The yellow line shows the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Up until about the year 1920, CO2 was relatively stable, or at least it was increasing only slowly, and so temperatures increased only very slowly as well. However, by 1940 and beyond, CO2 rapidly increased around the world because of those activities I just showed you. And matching that was a rise in global temperatures of more than 1.1 degrees so far. And so you can see there is an almost perfect relationship between carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, rising and global temperatures rising, confirming the idea that the greenhouse effect is caused by greenhouse gases and temperatures rise as a result. Time to assess learning. Write 1 to 14, put the words in the gaps, and then mark your answers. Go for it. So number 1, greenhouse gases. 2, global warming. 3, CO2. 4, 1.1 degrees C. 5, energy supply or energy production. 6, agriculture or deforestation together. or land use change, you could have said. 7. Agriculture. 8. Deforestation. 9. Sink. 10. Sulfur dioxide. 11. Cooling. 12. Less. 13. Warmer. 14. Less. Give yourselves a mark out of 14. If you got 12 or more, you've really mastered these questions. Anything less than that, go back to the previous lessons, watch the explanation again, and then come back and attempt this from memory. Time to embed learning. This is the deep practice that helps you really remember these ideas, because you have to apply your understanding to questions to master it. Answer the questions from memory and then mark them in green pen. 1. Mark your answers. You need 2 of these, explained exactly as I have. And question 2. Any one of these, explained as I have. Give yourselves a mark out of the total. If you dropped 1 mark or didn't drop any marks, you've really mastered these questions. Make sure you add in green pen any parts that you missed. From the lesson, write 2 questions. Answer them from memory, and then in a week's time, test yourselves to see if you remember them. Next lesson, we go to one of the most important questions of all, which is, why should we care about climate change? What effects is it having now, and what effects will it have in the future? Join me then.